a further discovery of where my unworthiness and performance-based mindset and worldview came from. And, because one of the things I talk about is discovering or figuring out where the origin story is of your particular emotional dysfunction or behavior came from, right? What's that origin story of that emotional dysfunction or emotion issue?
Welcome to the EQ Gangster podcast, where you will learn practical tools to grow your mental and emotional health and intelligence to be the best version of yourself, both at work and at home. It is real, raw, and transformational. The journey of emotional growth isn't easy, but it's worth it. I believe in you. This episode is sponsored by Classical Conversations. Since 1997, Classical Conversations has been equipping families like yours with the resources to homeschool with confidence, following a classical curriculum rooted in a Christ-centered worldview alongside other families in a local community. Homeschooling is doable with Classical Conversations. Check out classicalconversations.com/Gibbons for more information. Again, that's classicalconversations.com/Gibbons, Gibbens.
EQ Gangsters. Huge breakthrough epiphany on my own emotional growth journey I want to share with you all. And it is going to be kind of a further discovery of where my unworthiness and performance-based mindset and worldview came from. And, because one of the things I talk about is discovering or figuring out where the origin story is of your particular emotional dysfunction or behavior came from, right? What's that origin story of that emotional dysfunction or emotion issue? And so for those of y'all who have been following me for a while, I have struggled with a lot, so for a long time I had a performance-based relationship with God. And my relationship with God, for me, it was all about performance. And as long as I do A, B, C, D, A through Z, then, man, I'm tracking with God and all that stuff. Well, that's for me, just I've got my background. I love Jesus. And so my background is a biblical kind of background, a perspective and worldview. And that's not an accurate relationship or perspective of God. And so I had that too in a lot of my relationships, not just my relationship with God, but also a lot of my personal relationships. It was very work or performance-based relationship, which again is not super healthy. And I also, one of the most familiar emotions that I've had throughout the majority of my life, at least in my adulthood, is unworthiness, the emotion of feeling unworthy and undeserving, which I feel came from this performance-based relationship, because I could never do enough to make God happy with me, or make, a friend happy with me, or, whatever the case was. And so those emotions, I feel like, were tied closely together. And I could never figure out, man, how did I get this performance-based relationship mindset? Where did it come from? And where did this unworthiness come from? Where did this undeservingness come from? This, which I also feel is tied to very strongly, very closely, imposter syndrome that I have struggled with for much of my adulthood. And like, where's all this coming from? And I had no idea until recently, one of the clients that I have, coaching clients, leaders that I'm working with, is a very devout Catholic, and I grew up Catholic. And they, as they were talking, they were just, and just kind of sharing about their background and their leadership, and they're very active in the Catholic Church and stuff, which is super fine and stuff. What I heard a lot was all the different things that this leader has to do, not has to do, but maybe like a kind of an expectation that is set from the Catholic Church that he goes to. So I'm not making a broad sweeping like this is how all Catholics are. I'm just referring to this guy's specific experience, that all the things that he has to do, right? Goes to Mass on a regular basis, goes to church, in between the Sunday Mass, and then prays the Rosary and catechism, and with this kid, with the family, and all these different things. I thought, snap, that was my experience. And I forgot all the different, and again, this is probably not exclusive to the Catholic Church. I know there's other churches that have a lot of different, wickets that you got to kind of do, and so I'm like, oh, snap. Like, well, and then I'll tell you, so then I went to this, after, we were going to this Catholic church for a long time growing up as a kid. Then we switched to this, it's called a Mennonite church, which is kind of came from this Amish background. And in this particular Mennonite church I went to, and the purpose of this is not to bust on any of these churches, but to share my experience as a kid. The Mennonite church I went to also had a lot of kind of rules and regulations and stipulations that the women wore denim skirts, and they had to have their hair up in a bun, and you wore suits and ties to church, and different things. And so I went from one very structured kind of spiritual organization to another very structured, spiritual organization or religious organization, however you want to call it. And so a lot of performance. And then not just that, but my grandparents. So the grandparents on my dad's side had, were very, very intellectual. So my grandma, my dad's mom, had 2 PhDs, PhD in chemistry, PhD in philosophy. And then she was divorced from her husband, my grandpa. So then my grandpa, he was a dentist, and his second wife was very educated, and obviously my grandpa was a dentist, so very well educated. And then my dad's siblings, one was a ear, nose, and throat doctor. The other one, he was kind of the rebel of the family. He was a gold miner, actually, so didn't follow the traditional family education that the other siblings did. All that to say, it was all about degrees and education. And my mom had a master's degree in Spanish and taught Spanish at the university level. And even with just the master's degree, received some flack. And as a kid, I remember hearing some of this stuff where my grandparents would bust my mom's chops. And I heard it a couple times personally, and then I would also hear it secondhand from my mom, just about, man, they want me to be more educated and da-da-da. And so I think I got some of this unworthiness and undeservingness and performance-based mindset from my not only my spiritual upbringing, so to speak, but also my family upbringing through the grandparents. And then I met, you know, my great grandma before she passed away. I don't know, I was 6, 7, 8, somewhere in that range, maybe when she passed away, but we would go spend time with her. And she was a very thin, petite lady in her mid to late 90s. And I remember going, you know, coming, you know, when we go spend time with her, you know, she would also kind of bust my mom's chops about, well, you could stand to lose some weight and that kind of thing. And so, of course, and I'm, you know, but those of y'all that see me on YouTube, you know, right now I'm not a skinny guy, and I popped out of the womb. I'm still losing my baby weight. So I've always been a fairly big guy. And so I'd never made those connections before between the spiritual upbringing and then my grandparents, and in that case, great grandma, and just what their comments were to my mom, and then just me getting the secondhand smoke of some of those comments, and having that realization and connection for me was massive in realizing where maybe some of those insecurities, people-pleasing, performance, self-sabotage, you know, self-condemnation stuff came from. Both of those areas, I think. And so, you know, now that I have that awareness, which is half the deal, now I can start working on that stuff. I just want to share that big breakthrough with you guys.